I'm going to note here that I am not the right person to be telling this story, but I am here and I have a voice, so I'm going to make sure this part of history is not forgotten. The right people would be the people whose lives were affected by having to live in any of the internment camps in the United States, or their descendants. So, if you want better accounts, please go reach out and go look for some of theirs. I will do my best to link some below.
Hello followers, and welcome. For this video, we're going to dive into some heavy history. I want to preface this video by noting that I have done my best to provide this information as clearly as possible, and I've worked to include the voices of those that were directly affected. I believe this topic needs to be discussed. It is part of US history, and I don't think that it is discussed nearly enough. It gets glossed over, unfortunately. We're ashamed of it, and we need to talk about it. So, during the summer of 2020, after exploring Bensold Fort, and I'll link that, we visited Amache National Historic Site, which was the site of a Japanese concentration camp or relocation center during World War II. Before I talk about the site itself, I feel that some history is required for some background. Disclaimer, I am providing researched facts, and I'm primarily looking at the Pacific Theater in regards to the history I'm providing here. All my sources are in the description, so if you have any questions on it, you can definitely find more information there. All right, so we're going to start out with some definitions. According to denso.org, the correct term for these camps is concentration camp. The site says relocation center fails to convey the harsh conditions and the forced confinement of these facilities, as prison camps outside of the normal criminal justice system designed to confine civilians for military and political purpose on the basis of race and ethnicity. I also want to note that I was unaware of the correct term. The correct term is concentration camp until after my visit. When I heard the camps referred to in the past, it's always been as internment or relocation camps. All right, from densho.org, the commonly used term internment fails to accurately describe what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II. Internment refers to legal, permissible, the morally questionable detainment of enemy allies during wartime. There were approximately 8,000 first-generation arrested as enemy aliens and subjected to what could be described as internment in separate camps run by the Army Department of Justice. The terms become misleading, otherwise euphemizing when applied to American citizens detained by their own government. 2/3 of Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II were U.S. citizens by birth and right. Although internment is recognized in a widely used term, this site encourages the use of the term incarceration. All right, moving on to some background information, historical background information. World War II officially began in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. However, Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and later invaded the rest of China in 1937 and occupied China and Indochina, until the end of the Second World War in 1945. The US was officially neutral at the start of World War II. I say officially because there were some policies enacted. The Truman Library states that relations between the US and Japan worsened further when Japanese forces took aim at Indochina with the goal of capturing oil-rich areas of the East Indies. Responding to the threat, the United States placed an embargo on scrap metal, oil, and aviation fuel heading to Japan and froze Japanese assets in the US. Furthermore, the US demanded that the Japanese withdraw from the conquered areas of China and Indochina. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. In response, the US was brought into World War II. The US's response to join the Allied powers in both the Pacific and European theaters against Germany, Italy, and Japan makes sense after the death and destruction at Pearl Harbor. In school, we, at least here in the States, learn about the island hopping strategy of the Pacific. We learn about the battles of Midway and Okinawa. However, what we were rarely taught, at least to my memory, was the response to Japanese Americans, American citizens. For this video, I am referring to the people that had immigrated from Japan to America, or those people of Japanese descent born in America. On February 19, 1942, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, signed Executive Order 9066. This allowed the removal of Japanese Americans along the West Coast as every possible protection against espionage and against sabotage to national defense material, national defense premises, and national defense. 10 relocation centers were created and more than 120,000 people were incarcerated. Something that needs to be understood is that after Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese sentiment was at an all-time high. There had been general dislike of Japanese Americans due to Japan's invasion of China and their actions there. But after the bombing, sentiment and dislike and distrust just increased, skyrocketed. During this time, there was also a distrust of German and Italian immigrants. However, they were not targeted the same way as Japanese Americans. Here's a brief timeline after Executive Order 9066 was signed by FDR. This timeline is some overall, but mostly geared towards looking at Amache specifically. This information is from amache.org, and I'm using their terminology. So, March 18th, 1942, FDR signs a second Executive Order 9102, establishing the War Relocation Authority, also known as the WRA. In mid-May of 1942, the WRA selects Grenada as a candidate site for the Japanese internment camp. On June 3rd of 1942, the Grenada area has been selected for the Japanese internment and a work camp known as the Grenada War Relocation Center has been started. June 29th of 1942, 1,300 workers began construction on the internment camp west of the town. The entire Grenada War Relocation Center project encompasses 16 square miles. Most of this is for farming and livestock. 1 square mile contained the barracks, schools, hospitals, and other important buildings. On September 3rd of 1942, the first group of regular detainees arrives at Grenada. 7 more trainloads arrive from the Merced Assembly Center, and by September 18th, more than 4,500 detainees have arrived. In October of 1942, by the end of the month, 7,567 Japanese Americans have arrived at the War Relocation Center, where over 10% of the construction is incomplete. So a lot of these people didn't have places to live, and their housing was questionable anyway. More on that later. Jumping forward to August of 1945, the two atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima, August 6th, and Nagasaki, August 9th, and Japan surrenders on August 14th. Despite Japan's surrender in August of 1945, the last detainees did not leave Amache until October 15th of 1945. Jumping forward here to July 2nd, 1948, Congress passes the Evacuation Claims Act. Internees are given until January 3rd of 1950, so 2 years, 18 months, deadline to file claims for loss of property. Eventually, the U.S. government pays $13 million, less of 10% on the dollar of total losses. March 18th, 2022, Amache National Historic Site is signed into law by President Biden, authorizing Amache to be established as the part of the National Park System. And July of 2022, we visited. The following images and footage are from denso.org. The website has a ton more information and images. This is just a glimpse. I wanted to display to the best of my ability what the camps were like. The location for the Grenada War Relocation Center was selected because it is in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. Even today, it's an hour drive to a slightly larger city.
Now, after a few months at Santa Anita Assembly Center, they sent you to Colorado. And which camp did they send you to?
Amache, Colorado.
Now, the official name is Grenada.
Grenada.
But why do you folks call it Amache?
We didn't. Somebody gave it the name Amache. She was supposed to be an Indian princess in that area. This goes way back, you know. I don't know, a century or so, but Amache was a famous Indian princess. I don't know, I didn't even know that they had Indian princesses, but that's what they call it, Amache.
Do you remember how you got to Amache, Grenada?
Yeah, on a train.
Do you remember that train ride?
Yeah.
Share with me what you remember of that ride.
Nothing but soldiers, Caucasian soldiers, and they were very friendly to us. I couldn't believe it. You know, there was so much hostility on the West Coast against us, and these soldiers were very friendly.
Now, these soldiers, were they passengers or were they guarding you?
No, they were passengers going somewhere.
So it was a mixed group with
in the train?
People going to camp and soldiers going somewhere else.
When they transferred us from Santa Anita to Amache, that's when I saw these soldiers on the train.
Now, what about the dining room? Was it all African American servers?
Yeah.
Did they treat you, how did they treat you?
Fine, didn't talk to us. They served us. It's the first time I sat in a dining room with tablecloth and flowers on the tables. I said, boy, this is fancy stuff. I never had that experience. My mother never had white tablecloth in our house.
Do you remember how long that train ride took?
A couple of days, 2 or 3 days.
Did you have to sleep sitting up?
Mm-hmm.
Did the train stop at all?
Oh yeah, they were always stopping. They were always putting us off to the siding, and other trains would shoot by, and then we'd get on. We apparently had a slow train.
Now, you mentioned about the trains back then, when you used the bathrooms.
They spray them on the track. They didn't have a holding tank, they sprayed it. And I remember we used to be standing on the side of the track, and this train come by, and the spray hit us. I didn't appreciate that at all.
Do you think that was done on purpose?
I don't think so. They didn't know we were there, the people on the train.
Now, when you got to Colorado, how did they take you off the train and into camp? Was it by a bus?
Bus, they put us on a bus.
So what were your first impressions of Grenada when you got to the camp? What did you see? What can you remember?
Well, out in the desert, they were still building the barracks. And then we ran into the dust storm, you know, and I never had that kind of experience. That's the first snow I saw when we got there. You know, when the wintertime it snowed. I never saw it snow before. Warren Grove never did snow.
So the desert, so it's hotter in the summer and colder.
Real hot in the summer with the dust storm blowing because it's always windy. The wintertime is cold, so you gotta have those, what it calls cast iron stove with coal. We gotta burn that. Yeah.
And describe the room that your family went to. What was that like?
The only thing we had was the bed. There's no room to put tables or chairs because there's 7 in that one room. You know, like the regular bedroom right now, there's 7 people, so there's no way. And if you want to do a study or homework, you got to go to the library because that's the only place you could nice and quiet.
So how did your family arrange the room for 7 of you to?
Well, they just got a bed there, and I guess in daytime they got to fold it up and put it on the side. You know, like in Japan do, they bring the bed out, and because there's no privacy at all. Because so we spend most of the time in the mess hall or what the laundry room. That's about the only place in the wintertime because it's nice and warm. But summertime you could stay outside. But
well, I'm guessing too, your family, you had 4 boys that were teenage and young adult, and so there must have been lots of.
Yeah, it's kind of rough. But the married couple, they gave them one small room right next to it. But still, no privacy at all. So if you have brother and sister, it's kind of rough. Where my sister was too young, so you could get by. Then the place was open, so you could hear from neighbor what's going. You could hear whatever they're talking about. It's wide open, the barracks. So.
Now, in your barracks and block, were there other Walnut Grove people there? Did they keep you together, or were you with?
Well, when we got there, it was mixed. See. I mean, part of Walnut Grove people were there, but maybe next building or next block or something like that.
So in your block, where did the other people come from? Do you remember others?
Mostly from Woodland and let's see, what was it? Can't remember now. But it was pretty separated.
As far as you can recall, you were there for about a year.
Oh, maybe not quite a year. And so when I returned, I went to work for the camp newspaper.
Oh. So
it's called the Granada Pioneer. And so I got a job as a reporter, I think a Sunday school reporter, something like that, news. And then I graduated to having my own column. And then I decided I'd like to draw a little cartoon, so I invented a little character called Amache, short for Amache. So that was what I was doing when I left camp to come to Pasadena.
Oh, wow. That sounds very exciting, enterprising. So can we talk a little bit more about this, working on that camp newspaper? Because I think that's so nice that so did you actually get paid to work on the camp newspaper?
Of course.
It was a paid job?
I think it was also $8.
Oh, wow.
But it was fun.
So you obviously were a fairly good writer if you wrote a column.
Well, I don't remember. I've never seen a column that I wrote, and I don't imagine it was too wonderful because, it was only, 18 or so, 19, going on 19. 19.
And you don't remember what you wrote about?
No, I have no idea.
I must have been.
Can't imagine what I could write about.
But also to be able to draw cartoons.
Yeah, that was fun. I have a couple of cartoons that I received from Valerie Matsumoto. She got them from somewhere.
She found
sent them to me.
That's wonderful. So your mother was interested in the arts, and that was obviously you had some of her talent.
Maybe, yes.
So your mother was more interested in What kind of art did she do?
Well, she did oil painting, you know, landscapes and things like that. And then she loved the Japanese utae, and she played the satsuma biwa.
Okay, you're going to have to explain. Utae is an instrument?
Japanese kind of storytelling, singing, I think.
Oh, so she actually sang and...
And I think she danced as she sometimes. So she was quite talented, and she was a wonderful artist also. So she didn't get to do all those things while we were in Venice, but when they returned from camp, she had time to pursue her hobbies.
Oh, wow. So these were things...
You're right. So, you know, Dad loved Mom so much that wherever Mom went, he went. So he also took the classes that she took. So he got involved in her activities.
I see. So it was kind of an artsy family that you had.
Oh, yeah, they were. I don't think it rubbed off on me, but they had fun together.
Yeah. The cartoon strip, though, that takes a little bit of talent.
Well, it wasn't a strip. It was just one little square. And it was this little girl.
And it told a story, the little girl told a story?
A little situation. Not too clever.
The following footage is what I took at Amache National Historic Site. If I said anything incorrectly, it's because at the time I had not done sufficient research. Something I learned while visiting the Amache site was that the locals were not fond of the people sent to live at Amache. This was in part due to public sentiment that I spoke about earlier, and in part because the locals' land had been bought essentially by what was eminent domain for pennies of its value by the government for the camp. They just weren't happy. There was also a mindset too of, if they're here, then they must have done something wrong.
Hi y'all. Alright, this video will be a little bit more solemn. We decided to visit the Granada Relocation Center, National Historic Landmark, also known as Amache, here outside of Grenada, Colorado. This is where American citizens of Japanese family origin were relocated during World War II as growing tensions and hate towards Japanese Americans rose with the fighting. This is a part of our American history that does not get talked about enough. This site does not get enough attention. All the other previously internment camps don't get enough attention. But we will explore the little bit that is here as something that we need to remember. Part of our history that we should not be proud of, but does not need to be forgotten. At its height, some 73,000 people were forced to move here to this internment camp, and there were acres of gardens and fields and barracks that are just gone. The buildings were destroyed or just moved, sold off to other cities, and this is all that's left. These people lost their homes, they lost their livelihoods, and they did nothing wrong besides be descendant from someone we were fighting. And things like this need to be remembered. For all that the clouds create a very pretty picture, this This is a guard tower. These people, the people here at Amache, were under guard by military police. Unable to leave, unable to go back home. A barrack, or probably, this is not a real barrack. This is not one that people lived in. This is, I believe, a restored or reconstructed version. I'm gonna go find out. Yes, this is a reconstructed barrack based on research, historic records, photograph, and interviews with former internees here. No privacy. Walls that allowed the wind and the snow and the heat all in, the dust. If anyone knows anything about the Great Plains, there's so much dust and wind. It never seems to stop blowing. And all the while, they were under guard. Alright, this visit was very eye-opening. I hope you guys found this video enlightening, if not exactly fun. But it's a part of our history that we need to make sure to remember. It's something important, and it affected a lot of people, and it still affects those families today. So, Amache has been worth a visit. If you guys are near here, I highly suggest coming by for a visit. It's just off Highway 50, and it's free to visit. So this is the Amache National Historic Landmark.
As can be seen from my clips, the buildings that were built in the 1940s are no longer there. The buildings that have been added recently are reconstructions. The question is then, where did the buildings go? So I went looking for them.
Alright, so the Amache Preservation Society Museum was closed while I'm in town. So I am here at the Stanton County Museum in Johnson to see what research I can get done. So let's go find out. Johnson City, Kansas, a small town in Stanton County, Kansas, that's not far from the Colorado border. And you're probably wondering, what in the heck does this small town have to do with Amache? Well, the answer is that some of the buildings that were at Amache were purchased by the city of Johnson and are still in use today. Some as apartments and some as part of a church. So, I'm gonna show you guys those. You can definitely see the similarities between these original buildings and some of the replicas that are now that have now been built at Amache, the replicas. So let's go see them.
The short answer is the buildings were sold off by the federal government as surplus, and the land that they were on was sold to the town of Grenada. The structures were purchased by a variety of places, including the city of Johnson, Kansas. I do want to give a shout out here to the wonderful ladies at the Stanton County Museum for all the help with research that they helped me with. So backing up a little bit, the last detainees left Amache in October of 1945, and by November of 1946, the War Assets Administration was selling the buildings at Amache. In November of 1946, a copy of the Johnson Pioneer, there's an article about 3 of the buildings being purchased from the town of Grenada for less than $1,000 apiece. In 2023, these same buildings would have cost about $15,000 each. These were some of the earliest purchases of structures from Amache. So Johnson, Kansas purchased 3 of the buildings from the War and Assets Administration for town. Something to note about these particular buildings is that they were not detainee barracks, but officer quarters, and had more amenities like electricity. At the time, they were turned into apartments to help resolve a housing shortage. As of December of 2022, only one of the 3 buildings remains as an apartment. The other 2 were purchased by the Faith Baptist Church in Johnson and are currently used as church buildings. All 3 buildings remain intact. Other buildings from the Grenada site were purchased by school districts such as Holly and Bristol, among others. In March of 2022, Amache became a National Historic Site. Hopefully, with this new act and dedicated volunteers, the full history of Amache can be made available to more people. One of my favorite stories about Amache is the story of a rose bush that was found on the site by Bonnie Clark, an archaeologist with the University of Denver, nearly 80 years after Amache closed. In May of 2022, it put forth a tiny pink bloom. Cuttings of the rose bush were sent to an Amache survivor, Miss Tinker. I will list her first name in my write-up, but I cannot pronounce it properly. I do love her quotes, though. I knew that they, the roses, were representative of the people that had been at Camp Amache, who had brought them and who had propagated them. Gosh, they were showing survivorship just like we were. I love this idea of plants as living as witnesses to the past. They're witness roses, she said. They are there, they have been there, and they remain to this day to tell the story of someone's hope, someone's skill, and someone's determination. These war relocation centers were not Nazi death camps. It's not to say some questionable things didn't go on there. But it also doesn't mean they were right. They were not. Innocent people were removed from their homes out of fear and general suspicion without proof. Yes, these concentration camps had schools. There were festivals and gardens that were separate from the farms, like where the roses were grown. But these people lost their homes. They lost their land, their livelihood, their heirlooms, and they were never compensated properly, if you can even compensate properly for items like that. They were singled out based on their heritage. They were members of the Japanese American community in the U.S. Armed Forces fighting in World War II while their families were moved to concentration camps. This is not comfortable history. U.S. history is full of things that we as a whole do not like to discuss, but we must. We have to learn from our history. We must treat people based on their actions and not their heritage. I know this video is a bit heavier than normal, but I hope you learned something new. If you want to learn more about Amache or about World War II U.S. concentration camps, please see the sources below. Also, there is an Amache museum in Grenada, Colorado, but due to the timing, I wasn't able to visit, but they also have wonderful online resources. If you did learn from this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.
This turtle about gave me a heart attack.